on that other webinar, we were talking about, could you reduce like carbon, because obviously my carbon head on, I'm like, can you reduce the carbon footprint of a garment or thing, you know, delivery by pooling resources? So actually a lot of logistics companies are now looking at warehousing multiple retailers in like these mega warehouses, which makes sense, you know, because it reduces the cost of actually housing things like it from an energy perspective. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot. So I do feel that interconnected stuff, because if you're a mill and you're making something, but you've got to dye it and send it to here, and we don't make zips in this country, like what does that all mean? You know, can we make zips? I don't know. Kind of.
Yes, I think that's a good question.
Japan have got a bit of a yeah, kind of a market for that, but I don't know. I don't know whether it's a question of should it all be brought back here anyway. I think there's benefit to working with our friends abroad as well, you know. And I think the question is like, what do we want to be known for?
What do you, in terms of what, if you, in your mind, what do you think the most, from like a maybe like an ethical standpoint and from a kind of, you know, new business model standpoint of fashion, what do you think we should be trying to?
I think the logical solution would be short turnaround, like, you know, Jenny, and fast kind of delivery and all that. So fast fashion because of just time, not because of quality, because we can be responsive. But also I think all the, you know, the heritage stuff that we've been doing for years, because we've got sheep and the wool's great actually. And, you know, we've got mills, and we used to have mills anyway. We've still got a few, but yeah, that stuff. And, you know, and actually you look at Burberry and what they've done, and that's quite incredible as well. And they've continued, you know, to basically, like, you know, employ thousands of people.
Within London, or if you think within Manchester or in Leicester, or name any other kind of metropolitan city like Liverpool or something like that, the kind of development world that we're in now in terms of the housing that's kind of taken over a lot of cities, things like manufacturing isn't really, like garment manufacturing isn't something that like a city planner or like in the 15-minute city plan that everyone's like, this would be great. Like I'm not seeing like that as a part of it, even though Fashion Enter is situated in a residential area of Tottenham. You know, it's close to hand. How do you feel like those spaces can sit like within metropolitan cities, or do you think, as you talked about before, the big kind of warehousing, like distribution centers, do you think it needs to kind of take over big plots like that, or do you still see the lots of small plots being able to service this sort of new made to order, smaller batch idea in fashion?
Actually, something that I've thought about quite a lot, because what's tending to happen is like now, particularly with COVID, we're like migrating again, aren't we? And if you look at like housing and how that's, you know, speaking as someone who's potentially looking to move to Faversham, for example, you know, what does that look like? And if we're migrating as a you know, beings, where does our work go? Does our work come back to London? Do we move somewhere else? Do we create basically hubs or smaller like local hubs, which actually I'm quite excited about, because it means that the likes of Mulberry, you could replicate that in other areas. So it could be, you know, really small areas that are known for making leather belts, for example, or like Northampton and shoes and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So can we start to build that again? And perhaps the likes of, you know, like I said, fast fashion could be London because it needs to be right near the shops. Or could you have, you know, a retailer who has 5 shops in the UK, and each retailer has a small hub that's near the shop or above the shop and makes and produces, and it just goes straight down, you know, because I think that could be quite exciting. And a model that's already existing for that for the food industry is, a long time ago, I was working with a guy, and he was just setting up, or basically venture financing, a micro herb company. So what they did is they took over buildings, generally in central London, and produced, is it hydroponic or aquaponic, where basically they have like loads of water and fish, and then they grow these micro herbs, and they service like really high-end restaurants with these herbs, like direct to door within 5 minutes, you know. Could we do that? Like, why not? You know, these, if you look at Nottingham, for example, the lace market and the lace factory is like in Nottingham.
I think it's also like that sort of idea of people getting past the image, isn't it? Like, especially when you go to those the kind of factory, especially in London, that, you know, like the image that you would see and you would imagine, like it's a very, like, you know, Jenny and the guys at Fashion Roundtable do, like it's such a family vibe, and you know, they've got obviously the academy there as well as the production and all these things. It's like, you know, the image, I think, maybe is kind of, and I think that's what like Tamara talks a lot about, the kind of T levels, and obviously with 2025, by the time those people will graduate, it's that sort of skills gap that we now have, that they all seem to say is, I mean, they just don't have enough people who have the skills currently, and they'll be waiting a long time to potentially get them from inside of England. But do you think, again, like having that idea around food, like being in kind of closer proximity, do you think that that image of what a machinist, or, you know, could change by these T levels and by having it be more of a interconnected thing in cities and in small plots?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you think about, you can't be what you can't see, you know, there's the old saying about like reflecting back and having positive role models and all that kind of stuff. If you can't see it, you can't dream about it. Well, to an extent, but you know, that dreaming's a whole nother story. But yeah, so if you know, back in the day when we had our careers chat, it was like, what do you want to be? You know, and I'd known of window dressers, or like I'd heard of shops and designers and things like that. So I could imagine, like, could I be that person? Machinist, actually, my mum basically used to have a haberdashery shop and used to do knitting, and like we've got a long history of wool in the family, because my grandma used to work in the mills in Yorkshire, and kind of I've known that there's been an industry around like wool and making, basically. But I think if you can't see it, you can't be it, or you can't understand what that would look like as a job. And I think, you know, there's an issue around people feeling that ultimately, like, a machinist is not as I don't know what the right word is, but basically is not as good as being a designer. But you know, at the end of the day, you're working with a team in a job, creating something together anyway. And also, there's not as many designer jobs as there are machinists. So, like, let's get realistic about this. And actually, that knocks on to the hopes and dreams of like younger people as well, because if they're entering into a world that actually they're not fit for, prepared for, and dreaming that they're going to be like this star designer, you know, then they're going to get let down. Like it's just not that. It's just not like that. So we need to really focus on providing people with the education, the access to things that are fulfilling and enjoyable. Because I don't know if you've ever sewn before, but like when you actually sew, it's, you know, probably not all day every day, but it's really therapeutic. It's like a beautiful process, and kind of just being able to concentrate your mind on like one thing in front of you is actually really beneficial in a lot of different ways. So, you know, let's reframe talking about certain things. Yeah, and I think if you can see it, essentially, you should be able to understand what that is. And, you know, you guys do that at the Trampery with an open window, the front there, so people can actually see what people are doing, you know. And you've got your open door policy, I guess, as well, haven't you? So.
Do you think, though, in terms of to that point with, you know, academically, you know, kind of university level, when in fashion design or what have you, I don't have that much of a familiar relationship with people in that space, but do you think it's has it been like a cultured thing of saying, you know, become the designer, you know, like, is that are we seeing that too much now, or is it sort of just a natural thing that, I don't know, when the economy's good and things are going well, people are like, well, the dream big kind of situation? Like, what do you think
Yeah,
the is?
I think, I mean, if you put it in perspective, I graduated in 2001, exactly 20 years ago. You know, it's a long old time. And the roles there, you believed, you know, that you were going to be the designer. And actually, you know, I'd probably say half of our year, for example, are probably even more, are designers in roles still currently. But there's not much movement around there. So when you become like a senior designer, there's probably only 10 places that you can go, and you have to wait till someone else moves, you know, and it's very like jigsaw piece. And those jobs are taken by basically people in my year still. Like it doesn't move much. And the reason why that was is because we didn't feel that we at that time were mega connected to going into a factory. Like the industry in the UK, perhaps, you know, was still 20 years ago, you would think, well, where should we make? We should make in Italy, you know. So a lot of the higher end stuff was in Italy, really. And I think the conversation about like bringing it back to the UK is really exciting, because we can start to imagine how we would develop that as designers or people, you know, working with even logistics, like I was saying before. But yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot to be done, though. I think from what I am seeing from some of the educators, they're doing amazing kind of really progressive, like thought leadership things. And I think slowly it's becoming a less of a focus on designer. Like it's around creativity and imagination and like conceptual stuff. I mean, I'm saying this because I was kind of teaching yesterday at LCA. It's like some amazing stuff. Yeah, I've still got that. I'm like, oh, but yeah, there's a lot of good stuff happening, and I think we are kind of progressing that. But I still feel in the mainstream media, the narrative is still around heroing a designer, and that's all we hear in like, who's changed here, Raf Simons has gone here, Virgil's here, who's doing it. It's like, well, there's other people beneath them or by their side, however you want to choose to look at it, who are actually driving that as well.
I think it's interesting to get your perspective from a press side as well, like in terms of how, you know, because I feel like for me when I first started work, which was sort of like after uni, was like 8 years ago, and I remember like the made in UK, like make it British thing was, it did have a good energy around it, and people were really championing that kind of provenance and stuff. And I don't know whether my awareness of it slipped, or it sort of just became a bit like, oh, that's just one story you can kind of tell, it's not like got all this weight behind it. Do you think designers are communicating kind of the provenance of their product, or like is the idea of doing it in England, like, because almost you could argue that, I don't know whether this would make it in, but like, you know, if you know, because there's something, isn't there, there's something slightly like passe about kind of being like, you know, it's like Britain first kind of thing, you know, like some connotations that don't sit so well if you look at it from one viewfinder. And do you think that brands might find it a little bit gun shy to kind of want to just be solely kind of, you know, we make and design and produce in the UK? Is there that sort of the as you previously before Brexit, we were, you know, the creative sector very much still is, you know, interconnected with Europe and a proud kind of European nation, even though now we're not part of the committee. Do you think, from a press perspective, do you think there's going to be a hard transition into how to speak about those things confidently?
I think what you're talking about is basically the image of made in Britain, isn't it? So, you know, we've still got this. I'm kind of torn between it a lot of times, because made in Britain, what do you think of first? Big fat Union Jack, okay? And what does that mean to a lot of people? Well, actually, sometimes it's not a good symbol, right? And actually, it can be quite negative and connotations around that we maybe don't want to be involved with. But also, on the flip side, it can mean, you know, communities, jobs, all sorts of things. But I still feel, literally from a branding perspective, it's just a bit tired, like it's a bit old. We need like a refresh. It's got to be, you know, you think about the successful British brands, you know, like Conran and all these sort of things. It's design led, it's fresh, it's kind of like modern. It's not like historic, do you know what I mean? So we need to bring the traditional skills and all that kind of heritage through to something that's super modern and beautiful, and, you know, that kind of stuff, like basically Burberry do to an extent, you know, although they don't like manufacture everything here. But you know, it's that. And Mulberry, again, like I always bang on about Mulberry because I'm kind of like probably their biggest fan, but they do have that ability to really, really showcase the beauty of something, the simplicity, and still like keep the story and the heritage and all that sort of stuff.
To the point of like the newer designers, like whether it's like a Priya Farzaneh or like Supriya Lelo or like Sam Ross or Bethany Williams, like, you know, they are, you know, that is, whether it's from a diaspora or, you know, ethnically different backgrounds than, you know, white British people, but you know, they're from, you know, South London or whatever, and they represent that area hugely through their work, but also their kind of cultural background. Do you think that's the kind of news story of like made in Britain, is like, you know, these designers want to make in Britain because they represent their area and they're proud of being, say, Londoners or whatever it might be, but it's not this, as you say, that Union Jack. Like, I instantly, as soon as you said like, what do you think of when you see it, I saw a Union Jack, which is just like,
Yeah.
how can I untrain that? Or how could a brand
Yeah.
kind of untrain a consumer to think that? Maybe that's not their job, obviously, but you know, like, is that the work that has to be done?
I think it is. I think we've got to showcase the variety and the difference, like you've said, you know, and actually what we're strongest at is that like cultural melting pot and the different views, and not just one kind of representation of a Union Jack. Like, you know, and when you think about made in Italy, you don't think of a flag, do you? You think of quality, you think of like artisan hand, you know, all that sort of stuff. So why don't we think of that? Because it's kind of, we've removed ourselves from that in a sense. So yeah, I think there's different ways to get around that. Although, you know, if you think about a lot of the like high-end British luxury brands who make in their own studio, they are made in Britain because they're literally made in their studio, but they don't really like talk about that, because again, I think the image of made in Britain is just a little bit passe, you know, like it needs a refresh basically.
Yeah.
Without, you know, discounting all the amazing work that lots of people like Johnson's Belgin or like John Smedley yeah, do, you know. It's kind of, they're quiet, you know, they don't slap like a mega Union Jack on it.
To kind of flip the question, that, you know, the heart of the question that you said to me when we spoke for the show studio Fashion Roundtable thing, when you sort of said like the future of kind of made in UK and like kind of what that means kind of 10 to 20 and stuff like that. What do you think in terms of like looking forward, like where do you think the biggest opportunities are inside of that space to, you know, really kind of create or like an economic driver for Britain, and jobs and you know, opportunities for designers to keep production local? Like, where do you think in 10, 20 years we could be in an ideal world?
Nice big question there, Patrick.
Yeah, simple one.
I think for me, it's kind of like, I always come back to this community element. Can we provide jobs that aren't just around like one sole like brand almost? So like we become a bit more of a devolved system of creativity and making, and then like we all have our place within that. And what would that look like? Whether it's you know, I mean, it's starting to happen anyway. You've got like designers, like graphic designers sitting next to makers, or even like, not talking about like fashion, but, you know, people who make like pottery and stuff like that. Like there's places in Deptford, and, you know, there's these hubs and communities that people are like interacting, and it allows creativity to be free again, in the sense that they might be inspired by someone else. And, you know, I mean, like Bethany Williams is a perfect example with the way that she approaches making things, and the way that she works with communities and kind of like other people to story tell things. It's that kind of like synergy again, and it's less about one kind of like size fits all or one framework. It can be a bit more fluid, I feel. I'm excited. I know I just said it earlier, but I'm actually quite excited to see logistically what ends up happening in terms of, can we create these, again, back to the idea of like interconnected communities, and can we create a section of brands that have a like mind, that whether it's temporary or not, you know, can they be share logistics? Can they share like websites or marketing budgets or teams, or just kind of like really pool their resources and kind of cross over? And that comes back to manufacturing as well. Like when there's downtime in a factory, you could say, oh, well, actually, you know, we've got a run of, I mean, going quite granular, but like we've got a run of black t-shirts happening. I know you've got some black trousers that you need, so you could have it on that production line super quick, because actually, you know, if all the threads are lined up and they're all black, it's just quick to do, right? So you may as well just get on it. So it's like having that connection between each other and being able to understand, whether that's like every day that you talk to someone and you literally are like that close, or you're sat next to them, or it's like technology could enable that and flag up that there's a space in the factory, and it could alert someone, say, do you want to hop on that, and kind of like, or we've got a van going to up to Leeds with the deliveries, anyone else got a van, needs stuff in Leeds. It's like, can we just be a bit more connected and less competitive, and actually that'll drive costs down anyway. So it's like a win-win really. I think, what's also happened as well, we've had an unfortunate situation where Made in England's perhaps not been the best recently, with a boohoo kind of situation. So, Made in England maybe isn't what we're trying to push in that extent. But I think, as a consumer, as we all are, it's like, research, talk to brands. Like if ever I'm unsure about a brand or they don't have something on their website, I literally just email them and say, could you just tell me a bit more about this? Or I'm interested in where you make this, or have you got any sort of sustainability kind of like reports or credentials or whatever? And 9 times out of 10, they come back and they say, well, actually, this is what we're doing. We don't have that level of information, but what I can tell you is that, we're trying to we know our supply chain directly, and our founder, this is like a real example, our founder knows them, and and it's like, okay, cool, like I'm happy with that, because you care enough to talk to them, and they actually genuinely all know what's happening. So they might not slap on a Made in England logo or Made in Portugal, but they genuinely know what's happening. So it's not even like curiosity, but have the desire to go that step further and kind of like understand where things are made, and what that means to people and why it's important. I think just push a bit harder, and if information's not there, like ask for it, and care about that. And I think the more that we all do that collectively, the more that brands will feel comfortable that they can talk about things. Because one of the biggest things that I never foresaw as an issue was being able to get brands to communicate about what they're doing from a sustainability perspective. And still a lot of them in this country won't even touch that conversation. You mentioned painter jackets earlier. They have a beautiful story, beautiful product, and they share everything, like literally like the name of the dog or whatever that is in the office, but that's one approach. Not all brands really want to do that, because that's a very story-led driven brand, and it's, that's my preferred approach, and I feel that works, but it's not for everyone. So how can you, particularly the bigger brands I'm talking about, who are fearful, who probably have less control of their supply chain, how can we get them to approach the subject without feeling that they're going to get gunned down for it, really? Because it's a big problem, and it's one of the main things preventing the industry talking and being open, I feel.
Yeah.
And it's, from my perspective, I'm like, look, you've got to start somewhere. Like literally, get some focus groups, do some work, like speak to your consumers, see how they feel about this, how important to it is them, to them is it, and just really start that journey and build like a genuine understanding of what's important to your own community or your customers, and actually something we've been, so with Project 2030, which is a traffic light project that we're working on, it's been fascinating. We've been conducting some research, and I've sat in on like a couple of the sessions, and just fascinating to hear how people shop and consume and think about things. Because, I'm hold my hand up, I kind of feel that a lot of people have the same perception as me, or I feel they don't care at all. And actually there's this real kind of like gray area in the middle where we're torn, and we do and we don't. And the conversation actually I was even having with one of the students at LCF yesterday was about like want and need, and kind of like, what is the difference between want and need, and why do we feel that it's okay to buy something through need, but actually when you want something you feel bad about it? And actually for me, want is something quite nice, actually. If you flip it on its head, it's like, it's desirable, it's about love, it's about like energy. So actually wanting something is not necessarily a bad thing. And then we've kind of almost pushed it to like, you can only buy things when you need it. And actually, we don't need stuff. You know, you might need a sports bra because it's gone manky or something. But, you know, like, yeah, I think we need to start thinking a bit more broadly, and desire and want and love, and actually loving a product and keeping it in your wardrobe for 20, 30 years is not a bad thing, like, because you want it and you love it. The conversation that keeps happening is that, you know, overall we know we need to consume less and we need to consume better products that are, like you said, paid fair and all that sort of stuff. But how none of us have yet modeled a future in 10 years time where we're consuming less volume and what that looks like for jobs. So I'm not like a fiscal monitoring expert, but modeling expert by any means, but I would like to see that done. That's one of the big things that I'd like to see, like look at different ways that we could keep employment, keep jobs, like whether it's on, you know, reshoring or whatever we're doing, but play that forward and look at the models, because otherwise we're saying something that's putting people out of work, business, and then what does that look like? Where does that end up? So I'd really, you know, I'd love to be able to do a piece of research around that future projection modeling or something like that. I think, I mean, that's a mega big question to answer, because there's probably about a million things that they could do. But yeah, I think it's up to us as an industry through Fashion Roundtable, for example, to tell the government what we want and what's most beneficial for us. And that channel is open and that channel is there. And, you know, all the work that we do with Fashion Roundtable is exactly that, like trying to gather information, evidence from the industry and present it back to government to be able to change or, you know, advocate for what we want, really. I think that, you know, there needs to be a lot more like this future planning kind of thing done. I don't know who looks at that. Like you've even said about you know, town planning. What does that look like? Who's really looking at that in a need kind of jobs way as well? You know, I've got a few architecture friends and they plan and they sort of look at the change of what we're doing. Like, do we need more gyms and things like that? And that's, I find that quite interesting. And I was actually watching a program the other day. It was Rick Stein in Cornwall. And he was looking at Cornwall and speaking to the guy who set up the Eden Trust, and they're opening Europe's largest orchard. And what they're doing is creating like this marketplace within it, so that the orchard's there, the market's there, and everyone can kind of come in and do stuff. And that's quite like obviously a mega big project, but can we create something similar? Can we create these marketplaces or whatever we need to do locally? And can the government have the foresight to do that? Like, who's looking into the planning of these future communities? I think that's what I'm going to research a bit harder and find out that, because I think it's imperative really that we start to support each other in localized areas, as well as like the focus on, you know, London, because I kind of feel like now everyone's like gone, oh, we don't need to be in London. And actually for me, like, I love London, I love coming in and out, but actually maybe I don't want to be in all the time. You know, I'm quite happy to be out a bit more now, I think.